plastique. That's fine. Got it. It wasn't just art that interested Geoffrey. He was a man of many parts and more than an amateur. With rigor and finesse, he immersed himself in jazz and classical music, in buying Turkish and Persian rugs and English antique silver with a discerning eye, and amassing a huge collection of cookbooks from all over the world to produce fine cuisine. He enjoyed tennis, basketball, and squash, cars, Corvettes, Jaguars, and Mercedes, and women, undoubtedly. I was his last of several wives. He was fond of cats. Geoffrey rose through the ranks of the IMF, becoming assistant director of the European department. I picture him as a demanding but fair boss. It had not been a straight path from his native Australia. Growing up in Melbourne and Hobart in Tasmania, he studied meteorology at the University of Tasmania and moved to Melbourne to become a TV meteorologist. Soon he decided on a new direction and earned a master's degree in economics at the University of Melbourne. Completing this with distinction, he served as an economist with the Australian Treasury in Canberra. And from there, he was recruited to the IMF. Geoffrey was proud of being a very fast walker, and so it is all the more surprising that day that he paused long enough with his colleague Alison Mitchell to notice a work of art. And this is the work of art. He recalled, although it was I who went into the shop to buy the painting, there was another one in a folder. Both were unframed apart from a mat. The one in the window was what I would call a door, in basically an overall brown-looking design in the artist's clay style. The one inside Fondul Plastique was from the Memories of a Museum series, based on primitive Italian paintings of the 12th to 13th centuries. At the time, I preferred it, but so too did Alison, who decided to buy one also. In gentlemanly fashion, I gave her first choice, and I bought the door that was in the window. Geoffrey later found a similar Memories example for himself. A collector was born. Back in Washington a year later, Alison went to the trouble, knowing that their artist was in the US, of bringing the Romanian embassy to inquire about his whereabouts and to arrange with him to meet them on Independence Day. So it was that Geoffrey first met Corneliu Petrescu. Geoffrey and his wife Maria took him, together with Alison Mitchell, to their friend Charles Baker's barbecue, 2 extra guests for their friend but reluctant host. However, Geoffrey said, Maria bullied him into having us all, and in fairness to him, he was very hospitable, and I think pleased to be able to introduce an artist from Europe to his other guests. Geoffrey and Maria had promised to eat less steak and potatoes. The annual IMF mission to Romania usually happened in the late spring or early summer, and in May 1975, thank you. In May 1975, thanks. Geoffrey dined with the Petrescus in Bucharest, either at their apartment on Strada Dimitri Marinescu or at a restaurant downstairs. And here, to celebrate their new friendship, Corneliu gave Geoffrey his self-portrait and one of Mariana. Oh no, I turn the page again. How do I turn the page? This is not working very well. And one of Mariana. Thank you. This friendship became the mainstay of all their lives. Decades later, following Corneliu's death on May 3rd, 2009, Geoffrey wrote letters of condolence to Mariana almost daily. In one, he recalled Corneliu's great generosity in introducing him to his artist colleagues. Obviously, there were the Gordus. He also introduced me to Pacha and Sharu, amongst others, and enabled me to add their works to my collection. Corneliu's intent, and he had taken great trouble about it, was to find Romanian paintings to add to Geoffrey's collection in order to make it as representative of those times as possible. Corneliu, truly the second hero of this story, was self-trained as an artist and well-versed in art history, although he had first pursued a medical career. His wife, Mariana, wholeheartedly supported him in his gifts so that he could develop a personal style, as Geoffrey said, that was unique and served him wonderfully in producing the paintings that expressed his view of the world. Geoffrey's own pleasure in visiting museums owed much to Corneliu, he recalled to Mariana. He had such a wonderful eye for paintings in terms of who had painted them, the techniques used, and where the beauty lay. It was a wonderful gift that he gave to me over the years to be able to visit unknown museums and see new things with an understanding of the way in which an artist thinks about his work. By some chance, we thought of many things the same way and were able to jointly share things, even though we came from such different countries and backgrounds. Let me do another slide. Okay, thanks. Geoffrey's other important friendship in Romania was with Vasil Gorduz and Sylvia Radu, who were husband and wife. This was despite a language barrier. Neither of them knew English, although both Geoffrey and Sylvia knew a little French. He wrote to them, "It was a very lucky day for me when Corneliu took me to 29B Strada Ermil Pangrati in Bucharest and introduced us. I was given not only friendship, but an introduction to the life of artists and their works that few non-artists can have, and which cannot be learned from books and museums." Geoffrey believed that few people own sculpture because it is expensive and less easy to comprehend than paintings. Nevertheless, he assured them, "My house is full of works of Radu Gorduz, and whatever room I am in, there is something to remind me of you both. Porcelains, including heads, bronzes, carved stone, paintings or icons that you gave me or helped me obtain." It was not only the love of sculpture that the Gorduz gave to him, but also the knowledge and love of painting from icons on wood and on glass. These glass icons are a distinctly traditional Romanian genre, which Geoffrey came to embrace and collect. Another slide. Okay, thanks. In 1981, Sylvia gave Geoffrey her gilded bronze relief, Dacian Warriors. That work had an adventure on its way to Washington, Geoffrey told her and Vasil. "I did not return to the US directly since I had to go to a mission in Poland. It was late in 1981, if I remember the date correctly. The relief was wrapped in a Romanian blanket that you, Vasil, used to wrap around your waist for warmth. I could not fit it in my suitcase and therefore had to carry it as an extra piece of hand luggage. It was heavy. In Warsaw, the military coup took place while I was there. All travel into and from Poland was stopped, and the fund mission was finally able to leave only by special permission at very short notice, by train to Prague. I remember having to board the train in Warsaw at the very last minute before it left. In fact, I almost fell off climbing up the moving steps, carrying the relief under one arm. The relief thus had a voyage to Poland via Germany, another to Czechoslovakia, and then to France to finally catch a plane to the US. The typical IMF mission was very hard work after equally arduous preparation in Washington. Geoffrey's packing also included a list for the Petrescus. He remembered gold leaf, rubber gloves, etc., to bring with me, not forgetting Kent cigarettes, and denim jeans and Beatles tapes. On these missions, one is stuck together with a group of people, some of whom one has nothing in common with except work. One works with them, eats with them, and lives with them for several weeks in hotels and meeting rooms. Fortunately, I enjoyed the work of a mission. Moreover, thanks to the Petrescus and their artist friends, I had evenings and days in the company of you and Corneliu, eating genuine Romanian food in a genuine Romanian apartment, meeting genuine Romanian people. This turned a Romanian mission from what could have been almost a hardship into what was almost a vacation. Geoffrey was not the only one on a mission to be drawn to the artworks. His colleagues also saw the unique chance to buy from artists whose work during Nicolae Ceausescu's oppressive rule, that was 1965 to 1989, could not be found outside Romania. Geoffrey touted the overall quality of Romanian painters in the second half of the 20th century, the technique and ability of the artists to put their thoughts onto canvas, and the quality of those thoughts were very high indeed. He added, "It is to the credit of the artists that they had to work in the political environment of a closed communist-controlled society that puts limits on artists' lives, for example, notably, the freedom to travel abroad." Fortunately, Corneliu sold quite a number of paintings to mission members at prices that were reasonable to him and the buyer. And the same was true to a smaller extent for Sylvia, who sold quite a few ceramics, not to mention the additional point that the buyers paid in dollars. On the 1978 mission, I was allowed to accompany my then husband, who was one of Geoffrey's economists. To Mariana, however, Geoffrey confessed that he could not remember much about that mission, except for the fact that we were taken up to the northwest of the country for a weekend trip that was interesting. It made a much deeper impression on me. Corneliu's studio, which I of course visited, was extremely small, nor was it heated or air-conditioned, as Corneliu complained to Geoffrey, who wrote back, "Still, you managed to exist there, to paint there, and to gradually create a body of work that people have liked and of which you can be proud. It gave you access to some wonderful colleagues like Muselianu, the Gordus, Pacha, and others. It was typical during the Ceausescu years for artists to be assigned very small and very modest living quarters and studios. The Petrescu's apartment, which I also visited, appeared to be only one small room for them and an elderly parent. Bucharest, conceived as the Paris of the East, seemed to my American eye to be very run down. Geoffrey commented, "One could not look too closely at the dust on the streets and the disrepair of many of the buildings. Bucharest has many very nice private houses and mansions from the 19th century and pre-war 20th century. But the way they were treated after the war was a great pity. Chip facades, wiring strung up the outside walls where the mansions had been converted into separate apartments." While the mission members were working during the day in meetings, tag-along spouses in most countries were left alone. This, however, was not the case in Communist Romania. A woman from the state's protocol office was assigned to look after me, accompanying me wherever I wanted to go. She was very interested in me, but our only common language was French, and if her questions became too personal, I could fall back on "je ne comprends pas." Our hotel rooms were bugged so that the Securitate, secret police, might record every burp. Fun business was discussed on sidewalks. In a Bucharest department store, it took me an inconceivably long time to find, arrange to pay for, actually pay for, and leave the store with an umbrella. I once got mistaken for a prostitute, perhaps because of my youthfulness and being on my own. I was sternly warned to avoid the black market. Queuing up for food looked like a lost cause, but I was able to buy small loaves of excellent peasant bread crammed with seeds, nuts, and grains for a pittance. On the weekend trip, which Geoffrey did recall. We were treated to enchantingly beautiful country, misty meanderings in deep forests and twisting mountain roads and small peasant farms, spiriting us back to another time. These were taken from a fast-moving van. Romanian hospitality at mealtime was legendary. Shots of Twica, a plum brandy of greatly varying quality, were insisted upon, often chased with beer. Traditional cuisine featured mamaliga, that's cornmeal porridge and sour cream, mitite, that's grilled sausage and other meats, and sarmale, cabbage rolls, all washed down with quantities of Romanian wine, both red and white. It's hard to remember what I had for dessert. At official dinners, because of my knowledge of French, I would be seated next to the more elderly finance ministers who had been educated in the then language of diplomacy. These were fascinating evenings. Likewise, the evenings with the artists, often in their own ateliers, were less formal, charming, and heartfelt, and we would leave them reluctantly at a very late hour. Overall, as official guests, we were treated in a special way, eerily special, shielded from the dark realities of life under Ceausescu's communist rule, traveling in chauffeur-driven cars, bypassing queues, and undoubtedly much else that I didn't see. And it was from this place that Geoffrey brought away the artists' visions in their works, precious tokens of the Romanian spirit, now to be shown to the free world. Decades passed. In 2008, thanks to a broken telephone line, Corneliu called me from Bucharest. He was frantically trying to contact Geoffrey, with whom he talked regularly but suddenly could not, and appealed to me. Thus, I came back into Geoffrey's life. Our marriage seemed foreordained, and I owe my current joyous role as chargé of Geoffrey's grand purpose to Corneliu, and perhaps also to some squirrel who chewed the telephone wire. Together, Geoffrey and I decided upon, and then arranged for his approximately 900 work art collection to go to his alma mater, the University of Tasmania. Even in his large house, the treasures had piled up over the years. Artworks were hung on the walls in vertical stacks, and when that space was used up, they were back to back and front to front against walls and furniture, or stored in portfolios under beds and in drawers and closets. Many times I drew upon the resources of my former colleagues at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery for advice about how to convey the collection there safely and properly accounted for, and the myriad other professional tasks of museums. Geoffrey continued to report on all of this to Corneliu's widow, Mariana, who shared in his triumph. Both of them have left us now. Geoffrey died in 2012. Since his death, to deepen my knowledge about the art collection, I have done quite a bit of travel. This has been beautifully organized and spearheaded by the University of Tasmania's curator and registrar, Rachel Rose. Geoffrey and I first met Rachel on our 2011 visit to UTAS to announce our art collection gift. We liked her immediately, and she right away took on the cause of the Tyler collection. For starters, after receiving its enormous shipment in early 2013, she cataloged every work. This became the Tyler Collection Research Repository, the online website, which is constantly being updated and enlarged and is an absolutely invaluable tool. I encourage you to take a look at it. tylercollection.omeka, that's spelled O-M-E-K-A, .net. Or Google the Tyler Collection and you will find it. The art presented in my book represents only a very small fraction of Geoffrey's collection. These are the works, my favorites, that I have kept for myself for now to grace my house here in Washington. So now let's take a closer look at a few of these. Of course, I have many Petrescu works, and they are the heart of my collection. Eastern's story here is early in his career. He is already finding his way with luscious colors, but perhaps somewhat hesitant brushstrokes. Angel is an icon, and Byzantine art dominated Petrescu's works. He used those dark, rich colors and a whole lot of gold leaf, which was scarce in Romania during that time. And Geoffrey would bring him books of it from a supplier in Silver Spring. Here's another icon. Petrescu became more and more interested in collage, as you see. Geoffrey wrote about this one. The collage and painting are secular rather than religious. It has as its base a found object, the cover of an old school book, upside down, to add to the abstraction. A major source of collage materials was book stalls on the left embankment of the Seine, and in Romania, old letters, stamps, and religious documents. Here is Butterfly. Geoffrey arranged for 2 exhibitions of Petrescu's work at the International Monetary Fund, and at one of them, his wife Maria purchased this. End of Winter. This is one of Petrescu's portraits of Geoffrey, and I think it's a very good likeness, and it hangs in my kitchen so that Geoffrey can look down on my culinary efforts. This is Christ in the Tomb, many religious subjects in Petrescu's work in the Byzantine tradition. This may look familiar. It's wrapped around the cover of my book. Geoffrey tried to interest Petrescu in producing large works. They would make the artist more money. But the idea never took hold. Petrescu did make an attempt, however, with this one for Geoffrey. It's an oil on canvas with lots of gold leaf also, and Petrescu also framed it. It has a commanding place in my dining room. This is untitled, and it's one of my very favorites. This is Paris, a lot of collage, and Petrescu often used old maps in his collages. Flowers. Petrescu inscribed this collage, to Geoffrey, the life is full of dusty memories. Geoffrey had supplied him with collage elements, a photograph of his grandfather taken in the 19th century at a gold mining camp in the desert in Western Australia with a group of prospectors. Another part of the painting contains the cover of a letter by that grandfather and some old Australian stamps. A landscape collage. Sandcastle, another landscape. Desert. Winter. The Petrescus made several visits to the United States, largely organized by Geoffrey, who accompanied them. They traveled around the West Coast on one visit and around Florida on another, and the scenery profoundly influenced Petrescu's work. The large collage piece in this work is a map of the United States, a fine engraved one, dated 1786. Truly, the greatest reward of this whole project has been meeting the artists, or at least their relatives, as many of them have by now died. For the book, it was crucial to obtain permission to illustrate each artwork. And as you can perhaps imagine, for some illustrations, this was easy, and for others, there were many difficulties, notably the language barrier, as Romanian is a pretty difficult language. Although most of Rachel's and my trips have been to Romania, Rachel has visited me here also, And on one of these, we went to Florida to visit Eli Grigorescu, the son of two artists. I treasure this work by Naparush, his mother, Japanese Bureau. And in the dining room of Eli's house in Palmetto Bay, I spotted the actual Japanese Bureau of the painting. Naparush was a very popular artist. She has died. Geoffrey said it was always difficult to buy from her since she never had much for sale. It must have been that the galleries were able to sell almost everything as soon as it was painted. Her husband, Octave Grigorescu, is represented in our core collection at UTAS. Thanks to Anna Maria Mayor, the wife of Romania's former ambassador here, I got to visit Sorin Ilfovanu in his Bucharest studio. This winter scene in Moldavia consoles me during our sweltering summer months. But when I showed a photo of it to Ilfovanu, he laughed a bit. He had painted it in 1982, and since then his work has gone in a radically new direction, with stick figures of men and women in various activities. Some of these have even made their way onto a line of leisure wear. The sculptor Gorduz did the bust of Geoffrey, which I showed you at the beginning. Here are two other views. It is on my mantelpiece, and Geoffrey is actually looking toward Australia. He would sit for Gorduz on his many Bucharest visits. This took at least 3 years. Between the sittings, Gorduz would bury the clay bust in his garden to keep the clay moist. At one point, he forgot where he had buried it, and it is also possible that Sylvia had very mischievously moved it. In the end, neither artist nor sitter was quite happy with it, but it was sent off anyway to be cast in bronze. The sittings were likely helped along by a wine that Gorduz made from his own vines, a drink reputedly quite robust. Another Gorduz piece, Bird Swallowing Its Own Shadow, is at the back of my garden, except in winter. Gorduz did many bird sculptures, following somewhat in his forerunner Brancusi's footsteps, and this one is thought to be based on an ancient Egyptian myth. Oh, I did this, I'll close this again. Sorry. This, let's see. Sorry, we have a tech problem here. This intriguing painting, Surreal Sea, was given to Geoffrey by Petrescu, but neither of them knew who had painted it. Geoffrey had never met the preeminent artist Jan Nicodeme, but thought it was by him. And for this book, I was willing to take Geoffrey's word for it. I had tried to track down a contact for Nicodeme without success until very late in the game, when a newly made friend put me in touch with his daughter, who lives in Paris. I sent her a copy of the book and received a quick and very gracious reply from her. I had misattributed it. Her mother, also an artist of that generation, promptly identified the artist as Florin Niculiu. Oops, it happens. And to make amends, I will correctly attribute Surreal Sea in the forthcoming revised digital edition of my book. And we will also buy a work that is by Nicodeme for the collection. And I hope to make 2 new friends. I can never tire. Oh, goodness. Sorry, we are in different. 2 new friends. Geoffrey bought many works. Sorry about that. By Ion Pacha, and these still lifes are 2. Pacha was considered the finest colorist of his time, and Geoffrey saw in his work an influence of Matisse. He wrote, his paintings, thank you, his paintings have the same simplicity together with lovely colors, and they are always pleasant things to look at as well as interesting. He was a nice man, too. I usually spent a pleasant evening at his nice apartment with his wife and family. Lucrezia was an artist in fabrics. She spoke good English as well as being a good cook. Their apartment was filled with beautiful things. The Paches were an exception in those communist times. Most artists lived in much humbler circumstances. Rachel and I were most fortunate to meet Lucrezia and their daughter on our 2018 visit to Bucharest. Lucrezia has since died. It has been a rare privilege to meet any still living artist. And Rachel and I got to visit the still indeed very much thriving artist, Stefan Kulcia. In this picture, it's his Bucharest studio. He's in the center there with the big white beard. I am to his left, and Rachel in the red dress is to his right. You can find Kulcia on Facebook. Most of Geoffrey's many Kulcia works are in Tasmania, but I've kept several treasures here. Geoffrey bought Man in a Show, his first painting by Kulcia, at Fondul Plastic, as he said, not knowing anything about the artist at all. It just looked to be a good painting. It is in the best meticulously painted Kulcia style, slightly in his fantastique manner, but not excessively so. And here is Cottage and Bird, which entrances many of my friends. I can never tire of looking at Study for Hill, Roman numeral 5, by Horia Bernet. Look at it and look into it. It appears very simple and straightforward. One of my friends found it boring, but study it a little. A lot is happening in those tracts of cultivated land. There's also a solitary tree at the top. To the left, there's a grave, perhaps, and there's a road, and perhaps a crucifix, and a road rising from the left, and the green pasture on its summit is almost luminous with its tiny white spangles. The brush strokes in this painting are fine and meticulous, and the clouds have their own small drama. Finally, there's the extremely unusual shape. It is so horizontal that I felt the need to illustrate it on a fold-out page in my book. And in my upcoming digital version, a QR code will lead to it. This hill painting is, in fact, a deeply contemplative vision, and Bernet continued to explore it, painting many versions. He was a religious mystic who contemplated nature, as one can see here. He and his group of followers lived in the countryside, an effective retreat from the rigors of communism. After the fall of Ceausescu, Bernet was the first director of the Museum of the Romanian Peasant, and I highly recommend the Peasant Villages Museum on your Bucharest visit. This bold work by Marin Gerasim, with its heavy layers of red, was titled Gate by Geoffrey. The back of the painting told more of a story, and this was often the case as I closely examined all the art in my collection. The inscription in Romanian called it Poarta Gert Valor, and I got my art historian friend Eduard Andre, who had also been a pupil of Gerasim's, to translate it into English. It's Gate of the Sacrifices. A label, also on the back, confirms that it was in a group exhibition in Mannheim, Germany in 1979. And the Romanian official stamp to the upper right, there's one, and very faintly on the back of the canvas is another, authorized it for its export for just that purpose. My book's designer and I agreed that it was important to illustrate each work as the artist had created it. This meant that about 40 had to be taken out of their frames and reframed afterwards, and this was an ambitious project. I am indebted to Jay Houston at Georgetown's Own Frameworks shop on the corner of Wisconsin and Reservoir for undertaking this. Quite a lot of interesting further information was found behind those frames and duly recorded in my book. Silvia Radu, the sculptor Gorduz's wife, is still living, and she is an old friend, even though we can only communicate in terrible French. On our 2018 visit, she was as dynamic and tireless as ever, exhibiting her latest paintings in a Bucharest gallery, reaching out to her friends and including us in everything. A cornerstone of our collection is the vast number of her blue and white ceramics, which in the Ceausescu time she turned out and sold in great quantity. She and her husband, both very well connected in the art world, had introduced Geoffrey to many of the artists whose works make up our collection. On one of our visits, Rachel and I were there to celebrate her birthday. She is now 87. There is no finer place in a house than over the living room fireplace to display a painting as grand as this. Charoux didn't give it a title. And indeed, as I look at it, I imagine all sorts of different things about those three forms. Charoux, who died in 2003, lived for the last 20 years of his life in the United States. And he gave Geoffrey a monograph of his work, which he inscribed with Washington, May 1983, which must have been soon after his arrival. It seems likely that Geoffrey bought this painting, including Charoux's frame, around that time. This scene of Adam and Eve and the serpent is an icon depicted on glass. More specifically, it is painted on the back of the glass, which requires the painter to paint everything in mirror image. Glass icons are a deeply embedded Romanian tradition, and one can be found in most people's living rooms. Geoffrey called them his greatest love. I find them spiritually very inspiring, painted by and for peasants, purely because of their feelings towards God. The simple, naive paintings have a goodness about them that is difficult to describe. It is true that purely as works of art, they are not very sophisticated, although obviously the skill of the painters improved as time passed, and some of the icons are complicated and semi-professional. The Petrescus gave Geoffrey most of his collection. Because of their fragility, I shipped them all, or so I thought, to the University of Tasmania, with the large shipment following his death. But later, I found this one in pieces, wrapped in a towel in a drawer. It has since been conserved twice and remains perilously fragile. A Romanian appraiser in Transylvania, where this icon was made, traced it to one of two workshops in the early 19th century and noted that the theme of Adam and Eve is infrequently used. And so those are the highlights, and this is the story to date of my collection. It is truly extraordinary to me that so much beauty has sprung from such dark times in Romania. We have all heard about some of the atrocities during Ceausescu's reign, but the art has remained undiscovered in the English-speaking world. And this is just what excites me, this little pocket of unknown art history. It's virgin territory for scholarship, and I'm pursuing a much larger vision beyond my book. One of my hopes is that despite Ceausescu may be a pump primer for scholarly study, and to this end, I have started funding postdoctoral fellowships through the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. There is also our endowment at UTAS, University of Tasmania, which is another source for fellowships to go to Tasmania and study the core collection. The range of topics is wide open. Studies of individual Romanian artists, a reckoning of their places in the international community, cross-fertilizations between the artists while they were cut off from the outside world during communism, reviews by their own contemporaries and critics, and so on. The language barrier and Romania's very slow recovery from communism are significant obstacles. Only very recently, the Securitate secret police archives have been made available for researchers, but that is a step forward. Currently, one of my Wilson Fellows, a professor who lives in Bucharest, is working on a biography of Corneliu Petrescu, And in a few weeks, she and I will meet in Tasmania to study our core art collection there. I hope she will continue this research by visiting Washington in the new year. And I will be publishing the revised digital edition of Despite Ceausescu, which I hope will reach out to wider audiences. And another visit to Romania again with Rachel and making more new friends, and on and onward. So I hit escape. All right.
Thank you very much, Frances. That was really great and very, very interesting.
Welcome.
I hope you can see the clapping hands that we're not
Yes, I can.
just everybody.
You.
Yes. And so now we welcome you to unmute and share any thoughts or ask any questions you might have based on Frances' presentation. So feel free to let us know if you have any questions. You can just speak out or unmute or raise your hand if you prefer.
I will start with your permission. Oh,
please, Daniela. Thank you.
it's so good to be here with you, and it's so great to hear stories about Bucharest. You made me homesick with naming the streets. I actually work on Emil Pangrati, is the national, the NPR of Romania, and I worked there for 4 years. So you made me feel
that was a blog from
the
studio.
Yeah. So two things just to clarify. In Horia Bernea's study of the hills, the little cross-like on the left, it's a scarecrow.
It's a scarecrow? Are you sure? Because I was reading somewhere that Bernet really likes to have a cross in every one of his paintings.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's maybe not, it was also a
maybe
it might have been both.
Maybe it's interpreted, yeah. But if you look at pictures, you see scarecrows everywhere. What is I had a lot of questions before we started, and you kind of answered. One of my questions would be with a small preface. I know it's very interesting to hear how you've seen the Bucharest of the 70s, of the 80s. I was a child in the 70s, and I had a very joyful upbringing. We're three sisters, and everything seems to be fun and happy. And I'm sure I have a totally different understanding. Now traveling abroad, I realize how different Romania was from the rest of the world, the Western countries. What are the happiest memories that you have, besides meeting all those amazing artists that you have during this time during Ceausescu?
Well, I guess a couple of happy memories. Some of them were just those wonderful dinners in the evening with both the Ministry of Finance people and the artists in their studios, because they were both, it was just so different for me at that time. I was there in 1978, and it was somewhat exotic, and it was fun to try to speak French when I had to, and just to enjoy all of the new and exotic things. And then the other happy time really was our drive through the countryside. We went up kind of to the northwest. We went above Cluj. We went into this sort of peasant country up near the border with Ukraine, as a matter of fact.
Maramureș.
Yes, Maramureș. Thank you for pronouncing everything correctly, which I haven't been.
I'm Romanian. Yeah.
Maramureș is just a beautiful area of Romania, and it certainly was when we were there. And we were there over the weekend, and on Sunday morning we were driving in this big van on a kind of a dirt road, and we heard strange music, and it was very exotic music. I don't know how to describe it. It was very peasant music. It was in a different musical mode from the one that we are used to. I think cymbals, drums, and some interesting wind instruments, which I had never seen before. And it was a procession, and it was a peasant wedding, and they were all dressed in their peasant clothes, and they were swinging bottles of Zwieka around.
It's called Horinka. It's triple distilled. It's little.
Well, we found this out because they were just giving out this stuff. So at about 10 in the morning, we passed around a bottle or two of this incredible Zwieka, and we felt very mellow afterwards for the rest of the day. So perhaps that was part of the happiest business, but it was just beautiful. And that country, I took many photos, and a lot of them were too blurry to show you because we were moving so fast. The driver went too fast, I thought. But that is such a beautiful part of the world, and it was really lovely that particular weekend.
Maramureș is very famous for the naive painters and for the Mary Cemetery, where there is a lot of naive painting on each cross. So it's worth going. And another question that I have, and I know we've spent a lot of time talking and dreaming about this, more about the collection than the book, is if time and funds and actually time and funds would not be an issue, what is your dream, the wildest dream that you would, what would you do with this amazing collection that you are now curating and promoting and still taking care of?
Well, I would just love to see a lot of scholars take interest in the artists and to really evaluate them and publish things about them in the English-speaking world, because right now the big barrier, it seems to me, is the language barrier. Romanian is very difficult, it seems to me. And Daniela, you're an example of having crossed the language barrier.
Things have changed. I have been married. I was married to an American 25 years, and we lived in Romania, and he never learned the language because everybody speaks English. So you met a generation of people that were more French, but right now, like as a proof, my ex-husband, he spent 25 years in the country knowing phrases and expressions, but never talking, because everywhere you turn around in Bucharest, everybody speaks English. So right now there is no problem.
That's
whatsoever.
Great. Well, I hope to go back.
You have to. Everybody should.
Thank you. And Daniela, thank you very much, both for your questions and your insights. So are there other questions or comments?
I'm curious to know. Hi. So at the University of Tasmania, what are they doing with the collection in terms of exhibitions and teaching guides and that kind of thing? I mean,
well,
it's kind of a long way from Romania down there. I mean,
it's a very long way from Romania, indeed.
And everybody speaks English, so that's good.
Yes, that is good. That's very helpful.
Right.
So I am actually heading out there in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to make sure that they do. I mean, I have been working with them for the past 10 years. We gave them a big endowment, and so I'm making sure that they are managing the collection, that they are caring for the collection, that they are producing a certain number, small number of exhibitions per year, opening it to the public, but by appointment. The University of Tasmania is a state university, as most Australian universities are, and it is very bureaucratic. And to get anything done takes really a lot of work. And so I've had several agreements negotiated using a lawyer in Melbourne but it takes forever. For instance, I wanted to buy a work by Nicodeme, and so I told University of Tasmania to well, first of all, I looked to see what was offered by Nicodeme, what's for sale right now. And I asked Chris Addison, actually, of the Addison Ripley Gallery, to help me with this, and he found a couple of really good ones. And so I sent them to the University of Tasmania. I sent emails of them, and I said, would you please, with our endowment, buy one of these, and what do you recommend, and so on and so forth. This was in June, I think. I've not heard a word back from them. And it seems like it went from Rachel's desk to one of her superiors to one of, I don't know where it is. So I'm expecting, and I'm going to make it a big issue. Expecting to hear.
I'm sort of interested in what the educational use of the collection would be for the average Tasmanian, student there. I mean, or is that the point? Or is it just more like, is the collection that's going to grow on its own? I mean,
the collection's not growing on its own.
Are the professors using the collection to sort of do stuff to tell people about what's going on with these artworks,
I am not, I haven't, if they are, I haven't heard about it, but
probably get to that.
Yeah.
It'll get to that, has to.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the collection, the paintings are displayed on the campus, and there's a rotating display, and they are up in the library. Sometimes Rachel will organize a small show in their library, but it's all very internal. It's just in the university.
Yeah.
So putting it on exhibition for the public, the only even closest thing to that was we had a show that traveled of Cornelia Petrescu's work to the Romanian embassy in Canberra a few years ago. So if people came to the Romanian embassy, they could see it there. So that was, yeah.
I mean, look at this work, and I see a lot of parallels with broad folk art kind of idea of making art. I mean, Matisse and stuff, but and in Tasmania, there's some tradition of that going on. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, there's a huge, I mean, the Aboriginal, they're not called the Aboriginal, they're called the first, they have a new term now, which I've got to learn because some of my friends there are very much involved with that, as a matter of fact.
Right.
So it's, it is.
My sister lives in Melbourne. This is why I'm asking all these questions. I've been to Tasmania.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We'll have to talk about that because I'm going to be in Melbourne the next week.
Yeah.
But
we've got right across the street from, she lives right across from the Pottery Museum. She lives right across the street, which is this great Aboriginal museum. Let's just say the word. Great. Great museum.
Well. I should get there. I hope I will have time to do that. I'm just filling up my calendar now with what I'm doing in Melbourne. But yes. Okay, but yes, coping with the University of Tasmania has been a little bit interesting, but they're very nice people and they mean well, but it's very bureaucratic. Yes.
I see Margot has a question. Margot, would you unmute, please? Let's see. There you go.
Are there interesting artists aside from the Aboriginal artists working in Tasmania? Are there contemporary artists?
Yes, there are a lot of them, actually.
Do you like them?
Yes, I do. It's a little bit outside of our collection, but I see a lot of work by them when I am down there, and there's some wonderful ones. Rachel has introduced me to a number of them, some of them in person, which is great. I've got some of their books. If you're interested, I can lend them to you. But yes, there certainly are. Tasmania, Hobart is a rather arty town.
That museum they have now is wild. The
Mona.
Oh
yes, wild. Yes, Mona, the Museum of Old and New Art, Mona. That is wild.
Very internationally known. It put them on the map, actually.
Yes, it did. It did. Yeah, it's quite an interesting island, I must say. Tassie is. So so it's quite a jump between Australia and Romania, and nobody but my late husband would have even tried to think of it.
Part of the legacy that he left you is his thought process.
Yes, it is a legacy for sure. Yeah, a wonderful one.
No, this has been a wonderful presentation. Thank you so very, very much. For those who are interested, I did put the website to the Tyler collection in the chat. And so you can just copy the link and go visit it at another time. And our next CCC program, as I mentioned, they cover various topics, is October 13th, also at 5:30. And Michael Usdin, who's another member of Georgetown Village, will be speaking on unprecedented challenges to American education, inequality, demographics, and politics. So he'll be covering quite a lot. And with everything going on in the world today, I am sure it will be a fascinating discussion. So I hope you'll come back for that. Again, that is on October 13th at 5:30. And we look forward to seeing you there. And Francis, again, thank you so much. This was really a fabulous, fabulous presentation. We are fortunate to have you. We are, as a member and as somebody willing to share your knowledge and the photos, and just amazing. And I encourage you to get the book. It's a great book. Francis was generous enough to gift the office with a copy. And we really appreciate it. So thank you all. Have a lovely evening. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you very much. Hey,
Thank you.
hey.